I welcome you to our time together tonight. I'm very excited to be with you, and it sounds silly to say I'm excited about such a hard topic as grief. But once I got ushered onto this road, I am grateful to be able to walk it beside other people who are walking it too. I think you're so brave for being here tonight. I think you're so brave for tuning in. I think it's a really hard topic to discuss. I think it's an even harder life to live as we begin to explore, what does it mean? What does it mean to live out of a place of grief? What does it mean to continue to do our lives after we've been ushered onto a road we didn't want to walk? We wouldn't have ever chosen this path. What does it mean to be here? And how can we do it in the most healthy way? Those are some things I want us to explore tonight. I got ushered on to the path of grief in February of 2010 when my firstborn, my only daughter, Jenny, got put into the hospital. Jenny was 31, mother of a 9-year-old girl, and had a wonderful husband. She was diagnosed on February 1st with the flu. The flu was epidemic in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. By Thursday morning, Jenny was so much worse. My son-in-law took her to the doctor immediately, who sent her immediately to the hospital, saying she was dehydrated, needed some fluids. I packed a backpack to go sit with Jenny while she was getting hydrated with some IVs that morning. But when I got to the hospital, I realized it wasn't going to be quite that simple. There was a doctor that put some pictures of Jenny's lungs up and turned and looked at my son-in-law and me and said, Jenny's got a 60-40 chance. I looked at David, I looked back at the doctor, and I said, a 60-40 chance of what? And this doctor, with kind eyes but very firm, she turned around and said, your daughter has a 60-40 chance of life. We got Jenny put into isolation and intensive care, not having a clue what she had. And within hours, we found out Jenny never had the flu at all. But what she had was group A strep that had gone without an antibiotic. And we began a fight for life. We began fighting every way we knew how to fight for her. She was vented, put on a vent almost immediately, which means we never heard her voice again. On February 8th, Jenny almost died 3 times. On February 17th, they amputated her legs. On February 20th, seizures set in. And on February 22nd, we stood around our beautiful daughter's bed and we told her goodbye. As our belief system would say, the angel swooped in and took Jenny to see the face of Jesus. And then we were left to go tell a 9-year-old girl that her mommy was gone. I'm a counselor. I do a lot of marriage. I do a lot of depression and anxiety work. I even had already taught grief classes all over the world. I've been in Africa teaching grief classes. But I remember walking out of the hospital that day saying something like this to myself. I had no idea it felt like this. I didn't know it felt like this. And that was a phrase I kept repeating for the next few years. I didn't know it felt like this. I want to really be clear as we get out our emotional shovels and hoes tonight to talk about grief. And I want to really be clear that I do not believe that death is the only grief-producing event. I think there are a lot of things that happen while our feet walk on dirt that promote great sadness inside of us. And these exact same tools I'm going to share with you tonight can be used for these too. Grief is not exclusive for death. And I'm not even sure, I'm not going to argue this, but I'm not even sure that death is the worst grief-producing event. You've got divorce. You've got broken relationships. You've got when kids don't talk to parents and parents don't talk to kids and best friends fight and split. You've got when siblings break up after a parent's death over money or something else silly. You've got sin. When we've done something in our lives we wish we hadn't done, that feeling of shame and regret that can promote great feelings of grief. Oh my goodness, you've got infertility, the loss of a dream. Those are all grief events. You've got job loss. Several of our friends have experienced that since the pandemic hit, and the pandemic itself has promoted a lot of grief feelings inside of us. You've got diagnosis, and I'm dealing with that right now. Mostly last fall, I dealt with grief feelings about my diagnosis, as I'm in a fight right now with breast cancer. My body right now does not have active cancer in it, but I did come back high risk of recurrence on some testing we did. So I'm in chemotherapy right now. Sometimes a diagnosis can promote feelings of grief and feelings of sadness. What do you do? What do you do the morning after the death? What do you do the morning after the job loss? You get up and there's no place to go. What do you do after the failed IVF treatment and there's no baby? What do you do the morning after the miscarriage? I mean, this list could go on. What do you do the morning after the big explosion? What do you do the morning after the papers are signed? And this is what I want us to talk about tonight. I want to get really, really basic. You see, grievers cannot do complicated. Life by itself is complicated enough for people in grief. But the best ways to open the eyes of our heart to good health are through winding it way back and getting very simple in our approach to life. Getting very simple in our approach to breath. I've created an acrostic. It's PERS, and we're going to be exploring each of those tonight. So let's start with the first one. That's physical. I was most surprised by how much grief hurt physically. My precious son-in-law was checking his blood pressure constantly because David was sure he was having a heart attack. His heart hurt from the pain. I had so much anxiety, I couldn't find a good breath. So what do you do? How can we nurture ourselves physically? I've got several things I want to list out for you tonight. Number one is we've got to get really aware of our eating. Part of what happened to me is my memory was just after Jenny died. I couldn't remember how to cook. I couldn't remember recipes. Now I know why my grandmother and my mom took food into people constantly after a death. Grievers have a hard time eating, or they eat too much. We've got to slow our eating down. We've got to get really aware of what we're eating. Got to pay attention. Got to make sure we're getting protein. You see, our immunity systems get messed up when we're in grief, when we're in that much anxiety, and we're very susceptible to getting sick. Sometimes with big things, we're really susceptible to getting sick. And so if you're ever going to eat healthy in your whole life, please do it while you're in grief. Eat small amounts, lots of protein, being aware, paying attention to what you're eating, and making sure that you're nourishing your body well. The next one is sleep. That's usually the number one question I get asked now. I do a lot of grief work in my counseling office now. Is what am I going to do about sleep? One of two things happen. Either we begin to sleep excessively, or the most common is I can't sleep at all. Maybe you go to sleep okay to wake up. The popular time to wake up seems to be in our body rhythm about 2:30. You wake up startled, or maybe you can't go to sleep at all. It's not going to help you for me to worry you, for me to speak words that would be worrisome words about you've got to sleep, because the more you think you've got to sleep, the less you're going to sleep. But what we can do is set our bodies up for success about sleeping. And that's hard. This is not easy. Nothing I'm going to share in the next hour is going to be easy. We're talking disciplining our bodies to make it work. I learned to take an hour of a bedtime routine. Warm shower, warm bath, whatever I wanted to do with that, relaxing, soft music, get away from blue light at that point. I know that I'm not always successful at that, but no blue light would be no television, no phone, no tablet, getting quiet, reading a boring book or maybe a very predictable book. It's not a good time to read something to learn. Get in your habit. Get in your habit of an hour-long or so bedtime routine. Work, because your body needs sleep. We used to believe in the counseling world, we once believed that depressed people couldn't sleep. Now we believe the opposite is equally true, that people who don't sleep can become depressed. Listen to me clearly right here, because depression and grief are not the same. They may have some of the same symptoms, but they are not the same. Depression is unhealthy thought patterns. Depression is unhealthy thinking patterns, unhealthy neurotransmitter activity. It's not grief. Grief is healthy. You were wired by the Lord to grieve. We grieve the loss of something we love. We're wired to mourn. We're wired to cry. You're wired for your body to ache. Therefore, we've got to figure out how can we have healthy practices that keep me from going into depression. And sleep is going to be one of those. Set yourself up for good success about sleeping. One thing I learned to do, and this is going to be a little bit yucky for me to tell you about, but one thing I learned to do in the early days of grief is to emotionally throw up on paper. Now, some people call that a journal. You can call that a journal. That's fine with me. I'd never do this kind of writing in a pretty journal. I do it on a legal pad, white or yellow legal pad, because I'm going to throw it away. But if there's thoughts that are ruminating, oh, I wish I had. I wished I'd said this. Why didn't I? Why didn't I go to her earlier? Why didn't I check in? Why didn't I see what else we needed? Why didn't we go to the doctor? Why didn't we go back to the doctor sooner? Those are the thoughts. It's like this. You've had that stomach virus where everything is just churning inside of you and you're thinking, oh, if I could just throw up, I'd feel so much better. I've had those before. That's what it feels like in grief here. Lots of your thoughts, lots of your grief is churning inside of you. And all we need to do is throw it up on paper, get it out of us so we can continue to think it, but think it clearer and not let it just ruminate in there where it's making us feel sick. But throwing up on paper, doing some journal writes. Eventually, I changed that, and I'll talk more about this in a little while, but eventually I changed that where I don't do throw up writing anymore unless it's situational. Last fall, I did about my breast cancer, but I don't do that frequently. Now what I do at bedtime is I write 3 to 5 gratitudes that happened during that day. I'm on the lookout for them all day long, things I'm grateful for. A friend said this to me. A friend gave this to me. I walked outside and saw this flower. Right now, as spring is starting to come, I walked out and saw this growing right in a crack in the concrete on my walk today. And I'll take a picture of it. It goes in my gratitude journal that night. There's something that switches in us with gratitude. Another thing that grievers have absolutely got to do, other people need to do it too, but it's important for people in grief, is exercise. Exercise releases endorphins. Exercise releases anxiety. And so if you're having panic attacks, anxiety attacks, or just feeling very anxious, which grievers frequently do, go for walks. Get out there, go for walks. Do whatever kind of exercise you want to do, even if it means crazy dancing in your kitchen. Just get your body moving to release anxiety. Another thing that grievers have to do is drink plenty of water. And this is a practice I still do 11 years later. The general rule of thumb is to drink half your body weight in ounces. What that means is if you weigh 150 pounds, your goal every day would be to drink 75 ounces of water. Grievers frequently can become dehydrated, not from tears. That's what I usually get asked. Is it because I'm crying so much? No, it's just because your body is working so hard because you're so anxious. Drinking water. Let's talk about tears for just a moment. I think this is so interesting. The tears of grief contain a totally different biology, chemistry than any other tears. The tears of grief contain toxins and need to be shed. If you do not give yourself permission to cry, you will become sick. Now, I'm not talking about making yourself cry. I'm talking about giving yourself permission to cry when you need to. The shower, the bath, on walks, when you're alone in your closet are great times to moan and to groan, to let it go. I frequently get asked, but if I start crying, I'm afraid I'll never stop. I want to be so bold tonight to tell you that has never happened to anyone. You will not cry forever. You will feel a cleansing of your soul when it's done. Give yourself permission to shed those tears. When I shed tears, I'm at my bravest, because when I shed tears, I'm my most vulnerable. It's important that we're able to do that. Let's move on into the E. The E is emotional. And you're going to find these are all tied together. I felt like grief was one big ball that just kept overwhelming me. And that's why I split grief into these 4 things, just kind of to have a checklist to go over in my own mind during the day, to call myself into presence, to call myself into discipline, to go, okay, have I taken care of myself physically this morning? At lunch, ask myself again, have I taken care of myself physically? Am I doing what I need? Am I being gentle with my body? And then we move into the E. What about my emotional self? Am I aware of my emotions? Am I aware of what's going on? Listen to me clearly. Someone said this to me in grief, and I can't tell you how much I agree with this. Strength is way overrated. Give it up. I have so many, particularly parents, that want to say things like, I just want to be strong for my children. I need to be strong for my children. I need to be strong for my parents. I need to be strong. And as a little girl, that's what my grandmother always said when there was a grief. When there was a grief in our family, I always ended up with my grandmother, who I dearly, dearly love. My mama's mother died when she was 9 years old too, and how I wish so much I'd ask her more questions so I'd know how to help my granddaughter. But my grandmother's phrase was, be strong, be strong. And so that was my go-to in grief, till a therapist told me, strength is way overrated. Give it up. Don't try to be strong. Just try to get through this. Don't try to be strong. Try to walk this out. Don't try to be strong. Get curious about, what am I feeling? What is going on? A question that grievers tell me they can't stand. And in the South, where you do this question a lot, when we pass people on the street, you may go, hey, how are you? It's just a friendly Southern greeting, and we expect people to say fine. That's not the answer. If you come to the South in grief, that is not the time when somebody passes you on the street and they say, hey, how are you? For you to go, I'm in grief and I'm hurting and things are terrible. But there's another question. Let me say it like this. When I'm picking my clients up in the waiting room, I'll say, hey, how are you? And I teach them, that is my Southern greeting to you. But then when we get in my office and we close the door, I'm, hey, how are you? That's the question none of us like. But sometimes, my friends, listen to me clearly with this. We have to ask ourselves, we have to ask our own soul, how are you? What are you feeling? What's going on with you? Now, at first, for the first probably 18 months, every time I asked myself how I was doing, it was always just sad. I'm just so sad. I'm so sad. There's an old counseling expression about grief that says this: it feels really, really bad to be so sad. But then one day it will be really bad when you start to feel glad. Because to begin to feel happy, when you hear yourself laugh, most grievers report, it made me feel like I wasn't being loyal. My own laughter made me feel afraid. It made me feel like I didn't love. That is not true. That is not true. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But for right now, getting curious about our emotions, go online. You can Google feelings wheel, emotional wheel, and that'll be just a smithering of words. All kinds of words, emotional words. Look at those words. And in our grief groups, what people will say is, I didn't know I felt this, but this word kind of picked me. I was drawn in by this word. This word drew my eyes. I remember the first time it happened for me, and it was the word confused. So confused. I don't know my life without Jenny, and I don't want to know my life without Jenny. I'm so confused how to make this work. Give yourself permission to be where you are. Give yourself permission to stay curious, and give yourself permission to show up wherever you are. In the curious part, I do want to say this right here. I think this is an important point. If you're feeling anger, and a lot of us do in grief, if you're feeling anger, get extra curious about that one. Anger is not ever a primary emotion. There's something else underneath it. Anger is typically reactive. Anger is typically defensive when we believe we're about to be hurt or injured, which would mean that usually underneath anger, there's a fear. Usually underneath anger, there is something that you're so afraid of that you just want to fight it, but you can't name what it is. Curiosity is really going to help you with that one. Give yourself permission to get curious when you get angry. It is not going to be in your best interest to stay that way, to stay angry. Give yourself permission, and I don't say this lightly, but I want to say it firmly. Give yourself permission to experience joy. Let's talk about joy for just a minute. I told you I was going to say a little bit more about journaling and that gratitude journal. What we know is the only pathway to joy is through gratitude. Go ahead, lean into your gratitudes so that you can begin to experience joy, so that the eyes of your heart are more open to what's going on around you, so that if it was one of your children that died, you don't miss your other children, so that if it's your life partner, your spouse that died, you still see your children, your grandchildren. Give yourself permission to experience joy. Now, I believe that the human brain cannot know two conflicting emotions at the same time. It cannot hold two conflicting emotions at the same time. What that means is you will never be able to hold anxiety and gratitude together. Those emotions are in conflict with each other. You can't do it. I want to err on the side with gratitude with that one. Now, I've been asked before, wait. You do say that joy and grief can hold hands. I do teach that. I believe that. I do not believe I laid my grief down to experience joy. I think those go together. But aren't those conflicting? They absolutely are not conflicting, because joy and grief are both rooted in love. Joy and grief are both rooted in love. They are not in conflict with each other. They spring out of the same well. They spring out of the same creek. They're together. They go together. I want to take you to a verse right now. It's John 10:10. It's a very popular verse. It's Jesus speaking. And Jesus says, "The thief has come to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But Jesus says, I've come that you may have life in abundance." The first time I heard that verse where it lit my heart up was after Jenny died. And it was a beautiful young woman at the front of a room teaching a packed house. And this woman was in her early 40s, never been married. She broke up with a man that she deeply loved when she was in her early 20s, because this man walked away from Jesus and she didn't want to be married to someone who wasn't a Jesus follower. But she knew that if she broke up with him, that the Lord would give her another man. That did not happen. She is alone. Now she's adopted a little girl, but for a very long time, she was afraid she was going to be childless forever too. And when this woman quoted this verse, this is more the way it went for me. The thief came to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But Jesus says, you may have life in abundance, even if you never get married. Can you have life in abundance? Why, yes, you can. Even if you never birth a child, can you have life in abundance? Yes, you can. Even if you're a grieving mother, daughterless now. Now let's go ahead and take it one step more, and going through breast cancer treatments without your daughter. Can there still be joy? Yes, there can. Joy is the most vulnerable of all the human emotions. It's vulnerable to experience joy. We use phrases like, this is from Dr. Brene Brown. Dr. Brown says we use phrases like, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. We don't let ourselves fully be open to joy. But let's be honest here, after you've walked a road of grief, what could be worse? Joy is vulnerable and requires great bravery, but it's worth every bit of it because it is the home for your soul. It's where your soul feels like it's living into what it was made to live in. There's a settling when you choose to live with joy. I had a griever tell me, I was working with a psychologist a few months ago whose wife had died. And he used this phrase, and I latched onto it. I absolutely love it. He said, I want to allow myself to be surprised by joy. I love that. I wake up every day now wondering how I'm going to be surprised by joy that day. What's the little things that are going to happen that are going to just take my breath away? Let me lay this down right here. This is going to be a little bit hard because I'm a high energy girl. This is going to be a little bit hard for us. You will not have those surprised by joy feelings while you're multitasking. You've got to fully show up. You've got to be fully present to be surprised by joy. Slow it down. Now, there's something else about emotion that I want to share with you, and that's this. Love and grief can be synonymous. I know you're only supposed to go to one therapist at a time. I went to 3 different grief therapists just to make sure I was doing it the right way. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and I certainly wanted to do grief right. I just wanted to get healthy and do all the things about grief I knew to do. One of my therapists told me this. He said, when you keep saying, I'm grieving Jenny so hard today, what would happen if you began to say, I'm loving Jenny hard today? My friends, listen clearly. You're not going to grieve something you don't love. And so we can interchange those words. We can say, I'm loving her. I'm loving her so hard today. And there's a switch that happens inside of us. And I love that phrase. But before we move on, before we move away from emotion, there's a warning I want to give. And I had to learn this one the hard way, and I'm still learning it. And that is not to numb emotions I don't want to feel. And we all numb. This again is from Dr. Brene Brown. We all numb emotion. If it's something I don't want to feel, I want to be comfortable, I take off to learn, how can I make this emotion quiet so I can get back to comfortable? Numbing emotion is not exclusive to the things you don't want to feel. When we numb emotions, we numb all emotions. When you numb emotions, you numb the stuff you want to feel too. What does it mean to numb? It means maybe when I choose to watch television instead of grieve that night. If I find myself about to cry, I'll distract myself by watching a television show or scrolling social media. Another number, alcohol, drugs, sleep, too little sleep, busyness can be a numb, anger can be a numb. I can choose to feel anger instead of intense sadness or joy, which are both much more vulnerable than anger. Anger is protective. I can numb with food. I can numb by withholding food. That was mine of choice with the story I'm about to tell you. The first Thanksgiving after Jenny died, now our family does the every other year. So before Jenny died, my husband and I were alone at Thanksgiving, but we had the kids with us at Christmas. The year after Jenny died, we were together at Thanksgiving, but not at Christmas. So Thanksgiving was there. Jenny lived 30 minutes away from me while one of my sons lived in Houston and the other son lived in Tennessee. So they all pulled out on Saturday morning. My children all pastor churches. They all pull out on Sunday morning. And Jenny was a children's minister. She would leave. But before Jenny would leave, she would always whisper in my ear, Mom, let's get together for dinner tonight. Because when the kids would all leave, I would just be so sad. The house would be so quiet. I love being with my grandchildren and playing silly games. My husband would be like, woohoo, woohoo, because it meant the house was quiet again and he had me to himself. But all the kids left the morning of Thanksgiving, and I walked back in my house after just finishing a big breakfast. And I went straight for my pantry where I closed the pantry door. And I began to scour the shelves thinking, I want something to eat. I want something crunchy. I want something carbohydratey. I want something that's not good for me. And my eyes landed on Pringles. Let me be honest here. I do not like Pringles. I don't like the way they taste. I don't like the way they smell. I don't like the way they make my mouth feel. But my youngest grandchild loves Pringles, so we had a bunch of them. So I had a personal eating contest with myself to see how many Pringles I could fit in my mouth at once, until something happened, probably till my stomach started hurting. I'm like, what am I doing? I pull out of the pantry. I quietly go get the dustbuster. I clean the floor to my pantry, and then I go find my husband. And I say, honey, let's go out to eat tonight and let's invite friends to go with us. He said, great idea. So we did. Both of those events involve food, my Pringles feasting and the dinner with friends. One, my Pringles feasting led to remorse, regret, and even a little shame and embarrassment. My dinner with friends gave me energy for my soul. I still cried myself to sleep that night, but my dinner with friends gave me the energy to continue to carry my grief. And I love that. What do you do to numb? How can you be aware of it? How can you stop? How can you show up? Show up, again, requiring bravery. How can you show up in what's going on? Another thing that we have to do is self-compassion. And that is when you treat yourself like you would treat a friend. Kristen Neff is a professor at University of Texas at Austin, and she's written a theory called the theory of mindful self-compassion. And it's where you learn to treat yourself with kindness. I was with a client the other day in her grief story. And she said, I just wish my parents would say XYZ to me. And I looked at her and said, what do you need to do to learn to say those things to yourself? We don't need to wait for other people to say them. We can learn to speak them. If other people aren't meeting our needs, we can show up with self-compassion and speak those things, which takes us straight into the R. So we've done physical, we've done emotional. Now let's do relational. That's the R. Relationships change when there's a grief story. Relationships change when there's a grief story. Sometimes in our world, people are afraid to be around someone in grief. They're afraid they'll say the wrong thing. They're afraid that they won't know what to say, so they'll just be silent. They're afraid to be with us because we're walking out stories they don't want to live out either. They love us. They don't like seeing us in pain. Relationships can be very fragile when one of the partners in those relationships get into grief. And on top of that, we grieve so differently. My husband and I had to get very, very curious about the other person's grief. We assumed nothing. My husband and I are very, very different on the personality spectrum. We had to ask some hard questions. We had to come to meeting in the middle about some things. We had to come to some resolutions. We had to do some negotiating. How many pictures do you want out? Well, not there. My husband said, you're putting too many pictures out. I just can't deal with this everywhere. Okay. Would it be okay if I put some right here? Yes, that's good with me. We negotiated. It's his space too. We had to negotiate some things to make them work. Some good relationship advice that my husband was given in between Jenny's death and her funeral came from another pastor who had buried a little girl. Mike called Rick and said this, Rick, there's a couple things you need to know before the funeral, before you can keep walking out this road of grief. Number one, he said, don't ever change your bio. You will always have 3 children, which I loved and appreciated. And believe it or not, I'd already been wondering about. But then number 2, he said this, people are going to say some really stupid stuff, but they're going to be giving you the very best they've got. Cover them with grace and mercy. Now, every time I hear that and every time I say that, I do this: grace and mercy, grace and mercy, grace and mercy. I picture myself under Niagara Falls, where the noise of the falls are preventing me from letting your words get into my heart if it's something hurtful for me. Grace and mercy. Now, that doesn't mean I don't say something back frequently. You see, I believe there's a definite difference between being kind and being nice. Being nice is when I camouflage pieces of myself to make you like me or to try to make you like me. Kindness is when I'm willing to show up with bravery. So sometimes, let's just use my breast cancer journey. I've had people tell me when I found out I needed chemo and I said yes to it. I had a friend tell me this, I would never do chemo again. I hated it. And what I had to say is, stop. How is that helpful for me? How is that helpful for me? Because I've made a decision to have chemo. Kindness is where you still use your voice and you can put periods at the end, but it means I still want, my goal is that we'll still have relationship when I'm done. I use my voice when I'm in kindness. Nice promotes silence. Kindness means I want to teach you how to treat me while I'm going through this really hard road. This is a really hard road. I'm going to have to teach you what I need. I need to teach you, and I might need something different tomorrow, but I need to give voice to these things. How is that helpful? What does that mean to me? And it may just be, I can't tolerate that right now, that you don't even know what's going on, but I need to stop this conversation. It's not going well. It's feeling awkward. Let's talk about something else for a minute, because the path is going places that you don't want it to go. Find some safe people. And most of the time, people report that safe people are people who love you enough to hold space with your grief. People who love you and value you enough to learn how to hold space with your grief. Grievers are attracted to other people in grief. And that's why grief groups are reported to be so successful. I had an awakening when I went to a grief group. I hear that a lot. We run a lot of grief groups here in Decatur, Texas. I run a lot of, I have a grief center here for children, for their parents, for their families, and for other adults. I run a lot of grief groups, and people report that the number one way people find joy again or find life again is through a grief group. Use your words to ask for what you need. Please do not assume people need. People know what you need. People are not good mind readers. Gone are the days, not that it ever worked, but gone are the days that we have the freedom to say, if you loved me, you would know. That is not true. People love me, but they don't know what I need. People love you, but they don't know what you need. All those people saying, call me if you need something, my goodness, call them. Call them. Give them a list. I need my yard mowed. I need somebody to go to the grocery store for me. And I need somebody to go buy stamps at the post office. Which one of those three would you like to do? Call. People mean well when they say, call me if you need something, but they don't know what to offer to do. Let them know what you need. Keep asking. Good, safe connections calm stress. They help us learn to carry our grief. They help us find sacred space. You'll notice I use that phrase a lot, learn to carry grief. I don't believe that grief is ever healed. I don't believe that grief is something you get through, meaning one day you'll just wake up and grief will be gone. I believe we learn to carry it. There's an old Nicole Kidman movie. It's called The Rabbit Hole. And in that movie, it's about her child's death. I think it's a 4-year-old that is killed by a teenage driver. And the movie is about Nicole's grief recovery, grief help, her learning to carry it. One day she's in the attic with her mom, who also had multiple grief stories. She's in the attic with her mom putting up the baby's toys. It's a dark scene. And Nicole says, her character says, Mom, does it ever get easier than this? And the mom thinks for a minute, there's a pause. She says, I don't know that it gets easier. I do know that you learn to carry She said, it's like someone sews a brick in your pocket and you can't get the brick out. And one day you'll wake up and the brick won't be your first thought. But then you'll bump into the cabinet and you'll be like, oh yeah, the brick. Or you'll wake up, the brick won't be your first thought, but you'll go to put your hand in your pocket to get out a Kleenex. Oh yeah, the brick. You see, all of this work we're doing, the physical, the emotional, the relationship, the relational, is to give us the emotional and spiritual muscle to learn to carry the heavy weight of grief that we'll carry as long as our feet walk on dirt. So we've done physical, we've done emotional, we've done relational. I feel like I'm running around right now with an appetizer tray, just saying, try this, try this, try this. There's so much more we could say about all of these. And everything that I'm telling you right now can be found in this book, Scarred Hope. My oldest son and I wrote this book together, Scarred Hope. And I'd like, if you buy this, it's on Amazon, I'd like for you to get the one that has the discussion guide in it. It's an excellent discussion guide written by a beautiful young woman named Sarah Brooks. But the subtitle of this book is A Mother and Son Learn to Carry Grief and Live with Joy. And this book, the beginning of it is hard because it's about Jenny's death. But everything we're talking about today is chapter 7 of this book, where we talk about very practical tools of how to make it work, how to figure out how to carry grief. So physical, emotional, relational. And now let's talk about one that for some people is the hardest of all, and it's spiritual. Is there sacred space for a broken heart? The answer is absolutely yes. Now, I've already been clear that I'm a follower of Jesus. I love him. Grief has been very, very challenging for my faith. I had to rethink everything that I thought I believed was truth and come up with some different stories, come up with some different things that I believe is true, that I believe are more foundational. I believe they're deeper truths. Some of the things that I've been taught, I don't believe anymore. Some of the things that I've been taught, I believe in the deepest core of my being now that I didn't have meaning to before. Let's explore that for a moment. About 18 months after Jenny died, I was driving to West Texas to speak for a women's event. And some land caught my eye off to the right. And it was just gray, ashen land. It looked like a bomb had gone off on it. And as soon as I got to my next stop, I wrote this quote: "Death created for me. Death created for me a spiritual earthquake, and it left me sifting through ash or rubble to find the remnants of my faith." You've seen those pictures on the nightly news or whatever of someone whose house had burned or house went through a tornado, and they're walking through what's left of their home. And you'll see them go, "Oh, yes, I remember this. This is the baby's book. Yes, I remember this sweater. My mom gave me the sweater. I remember this and I remember this. That's what I was doing spiritually. Oh God, I remember when you taught this about you. God, I remember this story about you. God, I remember this story. God, I remember this." I had to remember that his history with me had been good, even if this was a really bad chapter in a really good book. This was hard. When I found myself saying to almost every question, "I don't know." It was almost like this: "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. What do you want for dinner? I don't know. Well, what would Jenny do about this? I don't know. What does Malaya need with this, my granddaughter? I don't know." It's like every answer was, "I don't know." And I remember the day just crying out to the Lord, "God, I got to know something." I came to the conclusion that day, for the rest of my life, this was essential when I was facing breast cancer last fall, that God is still God no matter what happens in my life, that I'm going to see his face no matter how hard the way gets here, and that I will have a very close circle of family and friends who will walk beside me until I get there. I don't know. There are some things that I know. There are some things that I know. Now, one of the disciplines I have is I go around with index cards. They're in my purse. They're everywhere. I'm getting some bound right now to be able to give them out to other grievers. I'm packaging my grief verses. Listen to this verse. This is out of 2 Corinthians 4:17 and 18. So we are not giving up. How could we? Even though on the outside, it often looks like things are falling apart on us, on the inside, where God is making new life, not a day goes by without his unfolding grace. And I want to say truth and amen right there. This verse was a grief verse for me, but it was also a cancer verse about my own death. This one's in Isaiah 42. I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths, I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them, and I love this part, and make the rough places smooth. These are things I will do. I will not forsake them. Let me say right here, I do believe God gets blamed for a lot of stuff God didn't do. And I don't believe for a moment that God is responsible for Jenny's death. I know he could have stopped it, but he didn't do it. I don't know if it was the power of darkness or if it's just because we live in a fallen world. I'm not sure what it is, but I know God didn't do it because we serve a God who's the author of life. Now, I say that, and part of our book, in fact, there's a whole section in the book about things people say, religious cliches that are not helpful. There's a purpose for everything. I don't believe that. There's a reason for everything. I don't believe that. God needed another angel in his choir. I really don't believe that. I think bad things happen. We live on dirt. So I think we've got to watch our language. I think we've got to watch our religious cliches. They make things sound too simple. One of those that I wanted to share with you very briefly for just a moment is the word trust. What does it mean when people say you need to trust God? You just need to trust God. You need to trust God. You need to trust the Lord. I remember crying out to the Lord not too long after Jenny died, saying something like this: what am I supposed to trust you for, Lord? I trusted you that Jenny would live. We had over 15,000 people praying. Was that not enough? Trust you for what? And I felt the Lord speak into me. People asked me, was it a male voice? No, it was not a male voice, but it was the Lord speaking into me. And he said this: you will trust me to be who I said I am. You will not trust me to get your way. You'll trust me that I will be God even when you don't. I love that because I love him. Trust God even when we don't. Right after I had been diagnosed with breast cancer, Josh and I were doing a podcast, and this girl did not know that I had cancer yet. We were doing a podcast on the book, and she picked up Scarred Hope, and she began to read my own words back to me. I could not contain the tears. We're on Zoom doing this podcast, and I can see Josh, but you can't have eye contact when you're on a computer. The more I looked at my screen, I know he was looking at me, but we couldn't have eye contact. Listen to what she was reading to me. But here's a twist. Because of my desire to trust him, I had to reject some of the language I'd heard used in an attempt to package death up with a neat bow. We do not trust the Lord that everything will work out the way we want, that we will get our way. We live in a fallen world. Jesus said, the power of darkness is the prince of this world. Not one of the apostles would have understood our language about following the Lord to get our way throughout our life. Suffering cannot stop us. Our language must lead us to protect our no matter what kind of faith. So trust him for what? We trust him to surround us. We trust him to see us and to hear us. We trust him to give us exactly what we need to walk the path we've been called to walk. We trust him to use our stories for his purposes. Trusting God is essential to our direction. We lay our wounds at your feet, O Lord. We trust that you see us and that you hear us. We want to trust you that you will clean our wounds and turn them into scars. We trust that you will redeem the pain. We will move through the darkness, but we trust your light will be. trusting the Lord. There are going to be some hard things. There's going to be some really hard things that happen while our feet walk on dirt. Watch your language. Watch the things that you say even to yourself. Check your own belief system. What do you believe? What's going to be most helpful for you to believe? How are you going to walk this out? Because I believe it matters how we walk out grief. It matters the choices that you make. It matters the way you take care of yourself physically. It matters the way you hold space with your emotions. It matters your relationships, the way you love other people and the way you allow them to love you. And it matters the way you walk it out spiritually in your belief system. Grief is absolutely not, the early days of grief are not the best time to work out your theology at all. It's not a good time to make big decisions. It's a good time to be directional about your decisions, to walk in the direction that you believe are truth. I have something I want to read to you that Jenny wrote. I'm working on closing. Jenny wrote this, and I'd never seen this before she died. And a friend of hers gave this to me. Check this out. God, rip us constantly of self. Wait. Before I start this, I need you to know Jenny was in her own infertility struggle. She had one little girl who was 9 and could not have another baby. We had done lots and lots. I say we because it felt like we. We had done horrible little pills. We had done surgeries. We had done treatments that require lots of shots and timing. She couldn't have another baby. So listen to her writing when she's in that grief. God, rip us constantly of self and fill us back up with the attributes of you. Just like Moses, may we never get complacent in one place. May we never stay in the place of sin, of grief, of anger. Give us a strength and a constant desire to move, to walk forward, to keep on the journey. May we experience your indescribable and unexplainable joy. May we be clay, and we beg of you, God, to never stop your work in us until you bring it to perfect completion. Do whatever, she has it in all caps, do whatever it takes in us and in our family's lives to bring us completely to you. Do whatever it takes to bring us completely to you. I want to end with one more Jenny story. We opened her funeral. My boys did their sister's funeral, and one of my boys opened her funeral with this story. It was several years before her death. Jenny said this. She called a family meeting. Well, you know what? I need to give you some background. A few months before that, as a family, Jenny and David did not know this, but we all decided we were going to fast something every day to remind us to pray for Jenny's womb. I did not need to be reminded to pray for Jenny's womb, but other people in our family wanted to do that, and I was great to do that. So we all gave up something to remind us to pray. Either that Jenny's womb would have a baby or that Jenny would come content in not having a baby because she was struggling with so much depression. At Thanksgiving that year, Jenny called a family meeting at her house, and we all went over for dinner. And I can't find what verses she read, but she opened her Bible at the end. And she said, there's some things I want you to know. She said, Mom, do you remember teaching me to plan my funeral when I was a little girl? I said, I do remember that. I taught all of my children to plan their funerals. And what I meant by that was this. You come up with 2 or 3 things you want said about you at your funeral. And you live into those things. If you want to be known as a woman or a man who loves hard, then you love hard. If you want to be known as a generous spirit, then you live with generosity. If you want to be known as a kind person, you live with kindness. How do you want to be remembered? I taught them that. I didn't have a clue I'd ever be there for one of their funerals. But Jenny said, Mom, do you remember that? And I said, I do remember that. And she said, Mom, I don't ever want somebody walking past my casket and saying, oh, there's that poor infertile woman. She said, I want people one day to walk by my casket and say, there's a woman who continued to serve and praise the Lord even when she didn't get her way. And my son said at the beginning of her funeral, and that's our family today, we did not get our way, but we will never stop serving and praising the Lord. As long as our feet walk on dirt, we will serve him and we will praise him. I want to quote a verse over you as we close. It's Romans 15:13, and it says this: May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. It has been my joy to be with you tonight, and I'm so prayerful over our time together. Thank you.